Let me start off by saying that I'm deeply grateful to Ambassador Negroponte for not reciting my bio, which gets longer and longer and proves only that I'm getting old and can't keep a job. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here, back at one of the premier events of the year for those of us who care about Latin America and the Caribbean, the Council of the Americas Washington Conference. For me, it's an opportunity to see so many old friends, new colleagues, and the faces of a newly confident region focused on success. Thank you, John, for that introduction, and especially my thanks to Susan and Eric for allowing me to go ahead and speak ahead of a list of so many more distinguished speakers that you'll hear from today. Later today, you will hear a great perspective on this hemisphere and our policy from Vice President Biden, who is a passionate advocate for this region. He'll bring to this forum a fresh and clear-eyed review of just how important the Western Hemisphere is to the United States and just how much is going on that should inspire all of us to even greater creativity and innovation. But I don't want to give away all the good stuff that he'll talk to you about later. Let me instead give you a couple of quick observations from President Obama's recent trip to the region and what I think they mean for all of us. It's no secret that the President's trip to Mexico and Costa Rica focused heavily on our economic relationship. What was novel, it seems to me, is that when we were talking about trade, we were talking about what comes after our own trade agreements, whether it's the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the Transatlantic one just recently launched. Everyone wanted to be part of these next-generation trade agreements. When we turned to energy, which was a large part of the conversations, the focus was on diversification of energy supplies, new energy resources in the Americas, the economic viability and scaling up of renewable energy, and the imperative for regional regulatory environments. Let's face it, these kinds of forward-looking, globally responsible and responsive conversations were not what we were talking about 10 years ago. The desire to be responsive to all of our citizens' dream of a better life might have existed in the past, but the opportunity and the ability to actually bring it about is what was new. What I heard were 10 pragmatic leaders who didn't see cooperation as zero-sum and believed deeply, to paraphrase President Obama in Mexico City, that we are all rooting for each other's success as it means our success too. Even when the conversations turned to security, I heard leaders focusing on practical ways we can cooperate rather than accusations of blame. For years I've been asked whether violence born of transnational organizations in Mexico are spilling over into the United States. And for years I've pointed out that our law enforcement officials believe that Mexican drug cartels are active in over 250 cities in the United States. So what does spillover mean? How can that not matter to us? When President Obama was asked in Costa Rica, what have Americans sacrificed in this fight? He rightly pointed out that his hometown of Chicago had a record number of homicides last year, many of them linked to the drug trade. We are making progress against drug addiction and the crime and corruption it brings here in the United States, but too many of our young people are still dying from it. And so we make common cause with countries in our region in our shared responsibility to combat this plague, not because we don't want to fight it at home, but because it simply cannot be defeated by any one of us alone. Finally, I want to give a word on education and its role in taking full advantage of this moment of opportunity. There has been a great deal of talk about educating our young people for the 21st century, for the global marketplace, for a world where innovation and entrepreneurship win every time. And we know that to succeed in bringing still more people into the middle class and to satisfy the dreams of all those parents who have moved into the middle class in the past 15 years, we're talking about both quality of education and access to education. So how do we get there? The answer will look different in every country, but we all have to be pulling in the same direction. This is the reason President Obama launched the 100,000 Strong in the Americas Student Exchange Initiative 2 years ago. We see governments around the hemisphere beginning to invest in education for their young people, whether by sending them on student exchanges, by forgiving parts of their debt if they return home after an experience abroad, or creating new partnerships between universities and the private sector to expand education and high-tech resources. So today, I'd like to challenge each and every one of you in this room, and especially those representing the private sector. What skills do you look for in a new employee? What particular talent or educational background do you wish you saw more of in applicants as you grow your businesses in the hemisphere? For one company I recently spoke to, it was better public sector management. For another, it was health and well-being. I ask you today to help us get there. Think about contributing to our nonprofit partnership for 100,000 Strong in the Americas with Partners of the Americas and NAFSA to contribute in specific fields, in specific countries, wherever you'd like to invest in the promise of your future employees and your future customers. Even in this time of budget constraints, we convinced the U.S. Congress to join us in this endeavor. Surely you'd like to do as well as they did. I've picked just a couple of areas where I think we've already seen big changes in the region, but we're poised to see even more. And I look forward to the conversations today helping all of us better understand our role in being the change and delivering on the promises. Thank you so much. I think I made the fatal mistake of leaving enough time for questions.
Yes, please. Any questions from the audience?
If there aren't any, we can move on.
Well, perhaps you could talk a little bit about the economic theme, since this was such a big emphasis, and we've had these new trade agreements go into force with Colombia and Panama. You've got the CAFTA, you've got Mexico. All the countries that the president met with are countries that have free trade arrangements with the United States. So what can we expect that's new in the free trade area going forward?
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. I think there were two main themes on the economic side, specifically on trade, in the conversations on this trip. One was clearly the pace and breadth of Mexican reforms going on and how those would enable Mexico to really reach the full potential of NAFTA. The President spoke often about integration and about continuing the work that we began under NAFTA 20 years ago. And I think this is a particularly propitious time for those of us in North America to really concentrate even more in many ways on what comes next. The notion of the integrated supply chain, we've all heard the stories about the automotive sector in particular, but it's true in so many other areas as well. The way in which things are now North American, both in their origin and in their ultimate market. But the other thing that was interesting was a similar kind of conversation with Central American leaders and the Dominican Republic, in which leaders really looked at taking CAFTA and DR and making it a platform for what comes next in integration, in regional action, and in connecting the Isthmus and the Dominican Republic to the global markets that they want to reach. There was, as I mentioned, a lot of conversation about the two big initiatives by the administration in its second term on trade. The Trans-Pacific Partnership and the desire of many in the hemisphere to be part of that. Obviously, although we already have 5 Western Hemisphere nations that are participating in TPP, Chile, Peru, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. But there was also a focus on the Transatlantic Initiative, the TTIP, and whether that would include the countries within NAFTA or could include them at the beginning. And I think one of the main goals was to ensure that in moving ahead with that transatlantic dialogue, we not do anything that would disadvantage or hurt what we've built in NAFTA. And I think that the President was very clear on his goal of ensuring that would not be the case moving forward. So I think, one of the most interesting things that all of us know from our work every day in the Hemisphere is that as we move beyond just the regional trade agreements, we look towards global engagement and engaging with new markets, sort of expanding the presence of the platform of this hemisphere into the wider global marketplace. And I think the administration's trade agenda gives us ample opportunity for that. And it was, I think, very, very satisfying for all of us to hear that our partners in this hemisphere are very much focused on how they can take that next step. What other measures do they need to take? Do we need to take? Can we work on together to ensure that we really are projecting globally the trade and the robust connections that we've made in this hemisphere over the last 20 years? The question, if folks didn't hear it, was one about Venezuela and U.S. policy and what happens now going forward. I think that we've all seen in the results of the Venezuelan election and the closeness of that election, obviously deeply polarized Venezuelan society, one in which you have the population and the voting public roughly evenly split. And one of the most important things that we've emphasized over and over again is a process to try and bring reconciliation and dialogue to Venezuela, and most importantly, to ensure that the 49+% of Venezuelans, over 7 million people who voted for the opposition, feel like their voices have been heard. That's what I think all of us expect in democratic process. So we are not obviously talking about specifically, a winner, a loser, a preference in that score, but we're talking about democratic practices that need to be observed, that all of us signed up to under the Inter-American Democratic Charter, this hemisphere having been out front in committing to those processes and ensuring that people feel like they're part of the democratic process. There are lots of different ways to do that. But so far, we don't see that process of dialogue beginning. And that's something that we would clearly like to see in Venezuela. And obviously, we're talking with lots of our partners around the hemisphere to try and be able to do that. We've also said repeatedly that we would like a better, more productive, functional relationship with the Venezuelan government. And we look forward to having that relationship. But it takes both sides to be able to do that.
I'm afraid we've run out of time, but we want to thank you for joining us this morning and for helping us kick off this very important conference. And, good luck to you as you carry out your important mission in the months and years ahead.
Thank you all.